Welcome to the Mere Mortals Mountain Biking Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Badeau. Shortly before the publishing of this episode about the Tour Divide, which is a self-supported bikepacking race from Banff, Canada to the Mexico border, a new course record was set by Robin Gemperle. He completed the 2025 tour in just 11 days, 19 hours, and 14 minutes. That's something that most of us mere mortals couldn't even dream of doing. And yet, every year, plenty of amateur riders give the tour a try. In 2023 and 2024, this included my friend Stephen Magellsen. He got 2/3 of the way through his first year before having to, unfortunately, drop out. But then he spent that next year making a plan to learn from and overcome those challenges. His story is quite inspiring for anyone who is interested in learning how to do more miles on the bike or venture into bikepacking, even if the only equipment you have is a bike and your old high school backpack. And for the more casual riders out there, Stephen still has some great suggestions for how to just have more fun on any ride, no matter what the length or purpose is. He also shares an intimate story about how cycling helped him overcome depression. So let's jump into my conversation with Stephen Magellsen. So, Stephen, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about why you chose to do the Tour Divide, and then we'll get into some of the stories.
Yeah, so my name's Stephen Magellsen, and originally I'm from South Lake Tahoe, California. Been cycling since I was a 16-year-old kid, and just lifestyle cyclist, just basically just do it to get to work, get to and from, and get around. And eventually that's transitioned into me just riding to work, then eventually longer rides, and then I got into bike packing, and then I decided to tackle the Tour Divide, which is the 2,700 miles up to all the way from New Mexico all the way up to Canada. 2,700
miles, and how many feet of overall climbing?
150,000 feet of elevation gain.
And how many days did that take you?
27.
Awesome. Maybe could we start off with a description of what the Tour Divide is?
Yes. So Tour Divide is a bikepacking race / tour that was came up by the ACA, which is the American Cycling Association. And I believe it's about 20 years, maybe 25 years old at this point. And it is a race that goes from Banff, Canada, and it goes all the way down to New Mexico to the US-Mexico border. And so it's about 2,700 miles in total, approximately 150,000 feet of elevation gain. And people do it as a race. They also do it just as a tour as well.
Which were you going for?
I was participating in what they call the Grand Depart. And so the Grand Depart is the unofficial start date, because that's what makes this race kind of interesting, is that there's no actual backers, there's no sponsors, it's just a race where you show up and just ride your bike. And so there's nothing official about it, there's nobody that's really in a governing board as far as racing goes. And so, but the unofficial start date is the second weekend of June. So I participated in that Grand Depart, and I wasn't really racing, I was doing what I called aggressive touring. So aggressive touring in my mind is ride like hell and have a good time. And so my goal was to ride about 100 miles a day and try to complete that journey in 27 days. And the way that they also do it, the racing aspect of the Tour Divide is tracked through a GPS device. And so every person that wants to participate in the race end of it has a GPS tracker, keeps track of their location. They have to turn it on every day and people can watch their miles. There's a website that you can basically uploads all of those GPS dots so that you can watch them as they go along. So blue dots are what they consider racers. A race pace is considered about 95 miles a day. And then if you fall off that pace, your dot changes from blue to white, and then you're considered touring. And so I was trying to stay with the blue dot and in the race category technically.
Okay. So 95 miles a day. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to get up to that sort of a duration, and how long did it take you to get up to that kind of a pace?
So I guess I'll start with kind of how I got into cycling, which was as a kid, like most kids, you get on your bike, you can get out of the neighborhood, go to your friend's house and go hang out. I was born up in in Lake Tahoe, California. So it's a great riding town, very easy to access through the woods. And I'd go to all my friends' houses, and that's how I got into riding. Then eventually that transitioned into me riding to work in my teenage years. And I think that trip was, I started riding 12 miles a day was roughly what it would take for me to get down to my job. It would be 6 miles one way, 6 miles back. So that was my initial start of just getting out on the bike every day, commuting. And that was just, I did that for a long time. In fact, I actually had no intention of touring ever. I had heard about bicycle touring as a young guy, and I thought it was the stupidest thing ever. Because I was like, who would want to ride their bike somewhere when you could just drive with your sweet bike and go ride your bike somewhere? I kind of had that mentality about riding for a long time. Let's see, I was 16 when I started, and then I didn't start my first tour until I was 27. So I did my first tour 9 years later when I was 27, and I was living up in Bend, Oregon, and I was really depressed, actually, was the reason that I went on bike tour. I was just kind of working a job. I just didn't feel like I had anything going for me. I just was working a kind of a dead-end job, didn't really have much, was just barely making enough to pay rent, and was just in a really cloudy mental funk, and was just knew I needed to do something different. One of the guys at the bike shop I was working at had done a bunch of touring. He actually had an Instagram page called 10,000 miles at 10 miles an hour. And so he had done a whole bunch of bike touring, and he told me, you could just throw some racks and a bag on that thing and you could just take off. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. So I got that bike set up in Oregon, drove down to Tahoe where I had some family, stayed there for a little bit, and then I got rid of everything I had, sold my car, and then I rode from Tahoe down to Tucson. That was the winter of 2019. That took me about a month, and I was doing I think I was doing 40 or 50 miles a day, like super casual pace. Like I would ride for 6 hours a day, and then I would just set up camp or go find somewhere to hang out. And I was doing it like super touring mode. I was like, we'll stop here, we'll have a beer and a burger, we'll take in the sights, we'll hang out for a day or two, and then rode all the way down to Tucson.
And is that something that you trained for? You just kind of took off and see how it goes?
I just took off. I would describe myself as a lifestyle cyclist. I really ride because I enjoy getting to work on my bike. I enjoy getting my groceries on my bike. I enjoy going to my friend's house on my bike. Like my bike is my way. I just facilitate how I get around in the world. I just don't really enjoy driving that much. So I was always riding. So it wasn't like I hadn't done some bigger rides. I kind of started as I got older, pushing what I could do on a fixed gear, started doing bigger rides. Did a century on a fixed gear at one point. So I knew I had the strength and I knew I had a base of miles just because I rode so much, but I didn't have a training plan. I definitely was just a dude who just liked to rip it and just ride my bike.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And can you define a century ride?
So a century is a 100-mile ride.
And speaking of mileage, you talked about 95 miles a day or so for the Tour de Divide. What kind of elevation per day are we talking about? Is it varied? And then what's the overall accomplishment and you actually went south to north, right?
Correct. So I'll start with the last bit, which is the going south to north. That's not the non-traditional way that most people do the Tour Divide. Traditionally, people do the Tour Divide. They start in Banff, Canada, and then they ride south through the United States, going from Canada, going into Montana, Wyoming, a little slice of Idaho, into Colorado, and then down into New Mexico, and then they end up on the US-Mexico border. And I decided to do the opposite, which was to go from New Mexico, start at the US-Mexico border, and then ride north to Canada. And the reason most people go north to south, as far as I can tell, is just logistically, it's just a lot easier to get there. Most people are flying from all over the world, or they're across the country.
Yeah.
It's easier to get to the airport in Calgary and then get a shuttle over to Banff than it is to get to Antelope Wells in New Mexico. So a lot less people end up going down to the New Mexico. I did it because for me, I actually rode to the start. And so I actually started in Prescott, Arizona, rode through Arizona into New Mexico down to the start. And to me, it just made more sense to ride my bike to the start. I wouldn't have to deal with getting on a plane, getting off, dealing with the fear of losing your bike, that sort of thing. And that made sense to me, and it gave me a reason to ride a little bit more and have a couple more weeks off.
And talk about the temperatures that were going on during that time.
Yeah, oh my God. Yeah, so last year was particularly brutal. So I did it 2 years. First year I attempted and I made it about 3/4 of the way. Second year, made it all the way. First year was relatively reasonable temperatures going through Phoenix, Arizona and into Tucson, and it was probably in like the 90s, and so I ended up being okay. This last year we had a heat spike and it was like 112 the first day I started. So it was 112 in Phoenix, and then it was consistently triple digits for a week and a half after that. So it was like, I was like 112, and then I think like the lowest it got down to was like 105. Yeah, and so that was a whole nother...
A whole lot of sleep that evening?
The sleep was tough, but the harder part was the hydration, obviously. And that was where it really kind of dawned on me that I kind of had figured it out, was on the second year, was that I really had my hydration dialed in. It was like 110, and I was like, oh, I'm not thirsty. I'm like, I got all of that.
It's good prep for the...
It's good prep for the race, but it also just let me know that I had figured out how to be on a bike and handle the adverse environment like that.
So you're obviously an accomplished rider by now, but I love the story of, you decided you want to do this ride, but there wasn't a bunch of costly professional coaching. You didn't have support along the way, right? You just kind of did it on your own?
I did have some support in the sense of I did hire a coach the second year. So I learned from my mistakes the first year. I kind of got into the idea of even doing the Tour Divide because I had been studying holistic health for the last 3 years. And so I had been participating in the Czech Institute, and that's a holistic health program, goes for 3 years. And I was working on really learning about health, and they have a concept in there called the 1, 2, 3, 4 approach to coaching. And so the first one is called your one love. And so it's about figuring out what is it that you love more than the problem you're in right now that you're willing to change for. And so that's what sparked me onto the idea of doing the Tour Divide. Because at that particular point in time, I was just having a lot of mental confusion about my direction in life, trying to figure out what was going on and come up with something that would keep me honest about going to school. And so I was like, okay, if I do something so ridiculously big like this Tour Divide ride, it will give me the motivation to use these health skills that I'm learning to actually be able to train myself to be able to perform this feat. Because that's a big part of what I've been learning the last 3 years has been holistic health, and it's about corrective holistic exercise, which is the acronym is CHEK, and it's also Paul Chek's last name who came up with it. And that was all about holistic performance enhancement, if you will. And so that was what I'd been studying, and I did that first year as just kind of a challenge to myself to see if I could put some of these concepts into practice to be able to actually achieve something bigger than I'd ever attempted to do. So the first year was a little bit sloppy because I kind of did it a lot like most people traditionally do the Tour Divide, which is like, oh, you just get out on the trail, you have a bag of money, and you just eat from gas stations, and you just do whatever, and you just train your gut to eat all this terrible, horrible gas station food, and you just suck it up. And that didn't work for me. I actually ended up quitting in Montana about 3 weeks into that ride because I was just having such bad stomach problems, ended up having all kinds of joint problems. And I just knew that if I didn't quit at that point on the first year, it was going to turn into a permanent injury, essentially was the way I was thinking about it. So I had to kind of made that decision, quit that year, came back, regathered myself, and then doubled down on my studies about understanding how these holistic principles work to develop a healthy diet. Was the biggest thing on the Tour Divide. Like the riding, yes, you have to be physically strong, but actually being able to give yourself the energy you need through the food that you're eating is such a huge part of it that's really misunderstood and overlooked.
And how many calories do you think you were going through a day?
Oh God, I don't even know. I don't count calories, to be honest.
I asked because at the 24-hour race, a friend of mine was observing how much my son and I were eating, right? And I don't think it's obvious to new cyclists that when you go out and you put in these hours throughout the day, you have to really focus on the eating aspect as well.
I mean, you're probably 5,000 or 6,000 a day, something like that, I would guess. And my whole approach was totally different than the traditional cycling, fueling tactics. So the second year, kind of to get into the coaching and the support aspect of it, I hired a coach, somebody who was a student in the Czech Institute who was a couple years above me. And so I hired him to help me train myself to be able to go and do this ride. And what we kind of came up with was getting fat adapted, which is controversial to some people, but it worked really effectively for me. But essentially, it's putting yourself into a ketogenic state, which means that you're in a fat burning metabolism so that your body is starved of carbohydrates and uses fat as its primary source of fuel, converts the fat into the glycogen you need to be able to support your body and run your system. And I did that for several reasons. So first one was to was actually as an elimination diet. I was trying to eliminate everything out of my diet, figure out what was the things that were making me feel good, and what were the things that weren't making me feel good. And so I did a pretty radical diet of doing the carnivore diet for 3 months, and I did a radical version of the carnivore diet called the Lion's diet, which is just red meat, fat, and water, and I had a little bit of tea in there to spice things up. But that was it for like 3 months. Mm-hmm. And that allowed me to have a baseline of how I felt consistently on this diet, which was pretty good, by the way. I felt really well. And then I started reintroducing things to figure out what were going to be the supplementary nutrition that I was going to need to make it so that I could improve my performance. And so I was writing food logs every day. I was keeping track exactly of what I was eating, how I was feeling, and curating a diet specific for going out on the trail. And so I ended up coming up with 4 things that worked well, primarily beef, honey, dates, and peanut butter were the 4 things that didn't give me any kind of food intolerance reactions, no bloating, no, fogginess of your head, all kinds of different things you can get from food intolerances. And so that basically gave me like a window of, okay, these are the 4 things I know for sure I can eat all day, every day, no problem. And this will allow me to have the ideal fuel source for me to be able to do this ride.
Okay. So take me through, after you'd ridden down to the start, how many people were on the starting line, so to speak, from New Mexico heading north? And kind of how did those first couple days, couple weeks shake out with the folks that were riding with you? And then was it mostly people like you who are taking it at that kind of in-between pace, or?
So it's a pretty different demographic between the people that start at the southern end and the people that start at the northern end. So for just numbers, there's 11 people that start at the southern end of the ride. So in New Mexico, there was 11 of us that started the ride there. There was 170 riders that started in Banff. Okay. And so you have a very different energy going on there. For the most part, the people that I was riding with were mostly tours. So it was mostly people that were going to go slower than me. They didn't really plan on racing necessarily. There was probably 3 of us that were like adamant about, we're going to hit this like 100 miles a day. We really want to hit this 100 miles a day. And what happened is most of the people dropped out in the first week because just heat. So most people didn't know how to hydrate correctly. I watched a guy the second day who was like, oh, I got a cramp. And I knew immediately he wasn't gonna make it. The amount of water that he had on his bike and the fact that his body was cramping told me immediately he was dehydrated. And now you have to try to dig yourself out of a hole hydration wise. You're not gonna be able to do it. So he ended up calling it, and the other 8 people ended up calling it as well. So it ended up being 3 guys. It was myself, there was a gentleman named Everett, and then there was a guy named Willie. And we were the 3 guys that actually finished it all the way up to Canada.
So out of that 180 or so, what's the overall finish percentage?
40% people finish. So it's got a 60% dropout rate, generally speaking. I don't know the exact numbers from last year, but that's roughly what it is.
One of the things I've enjoyed with different race organizers like Epic Rides and Leadville 100, that they all kind of have this focus not just on the first place winner, but everybody else, so to speak. And
absolutely.
The Leadville founders have a statement that they make quite often, that they want to help ordinary people accomplish extraordinary goals. And this is certainly one of those. I know that the kids that I coach, when they came to presentation, they just couldn't fathom the idea of riding that far. But one of the things I kind of talked with them about is, going back to your point of different speed levels and that sort of thing, is just figuring out how far you can ride a day. And even if you're just going to give it a try, maybe 40 to 50% don't make it all the way, but 99% don't even show up to start. One of the things I'm hoping that we can do with this little project is to encourage more people to maybe even go as a spectator at some of these races, and then maybe the next year you sign up to give it a try. Beyond the hydration and the food, maybe talk to us about what other core elements are needed on the bike to at least make it those first couple nights and see if your body's going to hold up, but obviously having the right gear.
I'll segue to that, but I to kind of touch on that as far as ordinary people doing extraordinary things. My favorite riders are the little old ladies out there.
Awesome.
They were my favorite. Little old ladies in their 60s out there in the middle of grizzly bear country, riding their bike at their own pace, doing their own thing. And they were my favorite people because it was like, yes, I got to meet some of the racers and all that. And that's super cool to watch people that are breaking records and that sort of thing. But it's really people that you would not imagine doing that sort of thing. Because people told me all the time, it's, oh, I would never do that. I'd never do that. And so you just said it, you'd never do it. But I know there's a little old lady out there who's just cruising along and she's going to freaking make it. It was actually the year before, speaking to, not making it, the first year I didn't do it. I didn't make it all the way. And it was really hard for me to swallow. But there was a gal who I started out with at the beginning. We were all down south in New Mexico, and she thought she wanted to do this 100-mile-a-day pace and, really get after it. Then I had to kind of talk to her like, this is about this aggressive touring concept of, ride like hell, have fun. It's not about, are you going to be a blue dot or a white dot? It's about you're having the experience of being out on the trail, getting to go through some of the most beautiful parts of the country that most people never ever see. Enjoy yourself. And once she kind of realized she wasn't going to hit 100 miles a day, because people psych themselves out in the race. That's the thing. It's like they think if I'm not a blue dot, then I'm not doing it. And it's you're out on here bike riding. Stop worrying about whether you're racing or not, and enjoy the fact that you're out here on your bike and you have the ability to do it and the luxury really to do it, because the time that it takes and the financial commitment and all that. She was awesome. I watched her for the rest of her tour, and she'd take a couple days off at somewhere, get a freaking pedicure, go check out some historic motel, and but she made it to the end the first year. That was super inspirational to me, because it was like, no, it's about the keep going part. Because it's easy to get in your head about I'm not doing it the way I wanted it to go down, instead of enjoying the experience. Yeah,
so I hadn't thought about this until now, but you heading northbound probably get to meet a lot more people because you're passing the majority of them that are heading southbound. That's awesome. So going back to the overall course, what was the total mileage and elevation gain?
The total course mileage, 2,700 is what they say, but it changes a little bit every year. I think this year it was 2,668 miles technically. 155,000 feet of elevation gain.
And how many days did it take you?
27.
So talk a little bit about the course, at least starting south, heading north, kind of the different geographies that you go through, weather, and then also, sort of the mixture of roads, single track, to your point, ducking into town on some blacktop to go get supplies, that sort of thing.
It's incredible. It really makes you appreciate the diversity within the United States, because there's so many different geographical terrains. Starting in New Mexico, a gorgeous state, terrible time to ride down there because it's so hot. It's hard to appreciate how beautiful it is, but it is truly the land of enchantment. And it's interesting because, they get through the first initial 600 miles or so, and it's tough. It's really tough because you're just straight up in the desert, and so you're just carrying huge amounts of water. I was carrying 2 gallons of water at any given time, and I was drinking 4 gallons a day. So it means I was resupplying at a water stop at least once, and I was, at that particular part of the race where it was so hot, I think I was peeing 1 time a day, which is kind of scary when you start thinking about it. So you get through that initial section, and then you get to a town called Cuba, which is, so the Tour Divide also parallels the Continental Divide Trail. And the Continental Divide Trail is one of the 3 major hiking trails in the United States of America: PCT, the CDT, AT, and the AT. And the CDT is what this one parallels. But Cuba is a major hub for hikers, bikers, everybody that's kind of coming through and doing that. And that's also kind of the mark in my mind, like where water starts showing up again, because you end up getting through this stretch of desert where it's just dry. Your water filter is only good if there's water to filter. So you get through this stretch of the desert, you get to Cuba, and then you start climbing in elevation. And then you start being like, okay, you start getting into the San Juan Mountains, and it totally changes. You end up coming out of like the desert where you've got cactuses and just raw red rock, and then you end up popping into a pine forest essentially, and then you start climbing your way up into Colorado. So you have this incredible transition of like kind of bleak, kind of depressing, where you're like, I'm gonna die out here in this desert and turn into a skeleton, to where you finally see your first puddle of water and you're like, oh my God, there's water here. And then you make it through the threshold to Colorado, which is an interesting threshold, because as you come out of New Mexico into Colorado, the composite of the earth changes. You have the basically clay mountains in New Mexico. So if you get rained on down there, it turns into what they call peanut butter mud or caliche mud. And that's terrible. Like you're stuck in the middle of nowhere trying to push your bike, and the mud collects on the tires to the point where it will stop the bike from rolling, and you're just sliding it through the mud, if you can even walk through it. And you're pitched super straight up a mountain. There's a particular spot I've almost gotten caught a couple times that is really like treacherous. If you can get out of there without getting rained on, it's an amazing day.
Yeah. Talk about where you're getting your water and that sort of thing when you're in that desert environment.
What's cool about the Tour Divide is that you have a resupply point at least every 100 miles. And generally there's a couple of known water resupply points. One of the tricks I used was I carried a water spigot key, which you can get at the hardware store. Yeah. Basically it's just a 4-way key, and so if you go to a building that has a spigot that doesn't have a handle, you can turn the spigot on and get water out of there. There's just enough spaced in between that you can generally get water. It's not like it's impossible to find it out there.
Even somebody who's riding at a slower pace can just carry a little more water, get them through to the 2 days every 100 miles or something like that.
Exactly. And that's the harder part of going slower in those sections, is that you do have to carry a bunch more weight, which is just slows you down. That's the thing about the Tour Divide. You do have a resupply almost the whole way. And so if you are riding at 100 miles a day, you are going to hit something every single day.
And then what about in Colorado? Were you doing a mixture of city water as well as, do you treat any water from creek side type of situation?
I use a water filter. I'm not a fan of like chlorine tablets or iodine. You just carry a water filter with you. So in that town, Cuba, where you start going up into the mountains, I actually send gear home. I'll carry a couple of these on the front fork and a couple of other packs on the front fork that have like extra capacity for food, water, and then I'll slim down from carrying a 40-ounce clean canteen on each leg of the fork. I'll have a 64-ounce clean canteen bottle underneath. I have a 2-liter bladder inside of the frame bag, and then I have a water bottle for electrolytes on the handlebars. And so when I get to Cuba, then I strip the fork bags off. I send these water bottles and I just mail that stuff home.
And are most of the water that you're grabbing from there on out from a creek or something similar?
It's a variety. It just kind of depends on what's available. Sometimes you drink less water because it's cloudy out, or a lot of it depends on conditions. A lot of it's a strategy of like, okay, I have this much water. I don't want to be carrying as much water as I possibly can all the time, because then you're slowing yourself down. It's just a lot of extra effort. So depending on how the day's going, like if it's slightly overcast, the temperatures are pretty nice, I'm not drinking as much water, and I have a pretty good understanding how much water I need, just as a feel thing. And I'll be like, okay, well, I can just not fill up the 64-ounce and I'll just fill out the 2-liter bladder. Or if I know a section's got more abundant sources of water, then I won't worry about carrying a bunch of water. I'll just filter it when I need it. And so it just kind of depends on where you're at. And honestly, filtering's great, but it's timely. And so if I have the option, I'm like, oh, if I just ride 10 more miles to go to a gas station and grab a couple bottles of water, then I'm going to do that. So
talk about the food situation. What are you eating at your overnight location, maybe close to a town, versus what are you bringing out, into the backcountry with you if you're staying out there? And maybe what percentage of the time are you staying close to a town versus in the backcountry along this route?
I had a different strategy last year when I did it. So I would say 70% of the calories that I ate were calories that I sent to myself. I tried to limit how much I was eating from towns, unless I could go to a restaurant that was like higher quality, or I could get to a good grocery store. Good grocery stores to me is not a Safeway. It's like a Sprouts or a Natural Grocers. I want higher end, higher quality food. And the reason I did that was specifically because I was having the issues the year before with all these stomach problems. What I did to get all that food out there, so at the beginning of the race, right before I left, I sent out packages to myself. I sent out 2 or 3 packages, and then I had my cousin, as I was riding down to New Mexico, send out another set of packages. But essentially I had all of my food pre-made, pre-ready to go in a box, sent to a mailbox, or sent to the post office using general delivery. And then I would just pick up my package, and then I would have all the food that I would want. And I pretty much ate all my own food, just specifically it didn't make my stomach hurt. So
you're packaging this stuff up, you're sending it to a particular post office, and they'll hold it for you, right? And you can pick it up there even though you don't have a post office box or anything. What percentage of the time, was it 100% that everything was there and waiting for you? Awesome.
Everything made it, which was awesome. I didn't have any issues with that, so everything ended up making it. And the thing about that too is because I had been so diligent about learning what worked for me diet-wise, when I was eating on the road, I was way more clear-headed. I had a way better attitude about things. And I wasn't on this like crazy sugar roller coaster. Because the problem is like most people say, oh, well, you have a resupply. And it's, yeah, but that resupply is like a dinky gas station with ho-hos and crappy trail mix. And now you're sending your blood sugar on this way spike, you're coming way down, you're trying to exert all this energy. Not only is it hard on your body just physically, but mentally and emotionally, it's extremely straining because you can't quite figure out why you're feeling so volatile, not realizing like you're really messing with your hormones and your whole internal chemistry.
So most of the food, if I remember right from your presentation you gave at the shop, was more whole food type of stuff. It wasn't the backpacker meals, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't like the dehydrated meals, or at least prepackaged dehydrated meals. I did all my own dehydrating because it gave me a chance to control food quality, which is a big thing for me. Yeah, so I made what's called pemmican, and pemmican is like an old-timey traditional travel food. It's actually invented by the Plains Indians, if I'm not mistaken. And essentially what it is, it's beef that's been dehydrated and then ground into a powder, and then you mix it with tallow, which is beef fat that's been rendered into a liquid essentially. And so then you mix that all together and it turns into it's like a beef brownie essentially. And you can doctor it up with some stuff. But essentially that was like my main caloric intake, and it's tried and true. The history of pemmican is fascinating. The Plains Indians have used it. They used it up in Canada for the beaver trappers. It was at one point an army ration in the British Army. They would have a little tin of pemmican in their rations if they needed to it as an emergency supply. And so it was a time-tested thing there. And then also my own experience with it was amazing. I loved it. And people made fun of me for it all the time out there. They were like, oh, look at Meat Brick Boys here. But I knew I was eating better than every single other rider out there. I had the healthiest diet on the trail, which was like, yeah, okay, I might not be the fastest, but I know that my body at the end of this extreme activity is in the best condition it can possibly be in.
Yeah. So we've covered kind of nutrition and water and sort of the route planning. What about the gear on the bike? Is this your everyday bike, or did you have to make customizations to it?
Yeah, so I have the luck of working in a bike shop, and we sell some pretty sweet bikes, so that helped a lot. My bike was an Esker Hayduke, steel frame, hardtail mountain bike. I built it all custom because I knew exactly what I wanted from it and from previous bike packing experience. I built it specifically for doing the Tour Divide.
And what specifics did you add to it?
I went with a rigid fork for starters. It comes with a 120 millimeter travel fork normally, but I went with a rigid carbon whiskey fork, which was just less things to fuss with. And also more mounting points. You can add more luggage to a rigid fork than you can a suspension fork.
Okay, so no suspension.
No suspension.
Which may have become a little rocky in certain occasions.
Oh, my hands felt it at the end of that. I definitely would probably do it again with a suspension fork. I mean, I'd been riding rigid for a long time anyway. I'd had a lot of experience with it. The thing was that, like, if you're gonna ride rigid, it's nice having fatter tires. I think the first year I did it on Vittoria Mezcal 2.25s. This year I bumped them up to a 2.35, which is a little better, but realistically, if you're gonna run a full rigid for like that kind of a ride for that long, you'd probably be better on like a 2.6.
Yeah, so basically for those who aren't familiar, the bigger tires, you can run them a little softer, and that essentially becomes your suspension.
Yeah, so the bigger tire, the more volume you have, the less pressure you have to run into it, and then that way it allows it to like kind of, instead of like hit the ground, it more kind of deforms to the ground and allows it to kind of absorb the impact better. I had had a lot of fun. I had done that with my Karate Monkey. I had run like 3-inch tires on that and was a big fan of that for a long time. But just for this type of route where it's mostly gravel, there's stretches of pavement, it's kind of trying to find that line between comfort and efficiency. And so ended up going with a narrower tire, and over the long haul, my hands and wrists hurt a lot. It was better the second year I did it, but at the end of it, I mean, like you put that many miles on, your hands are gonna hurt. Like I knew it was gonna be uncomfortable at a certain point, but I mean, if you don't think you're not gonna be uncomfortable riding 3,000 miles, you're out of your mind. There's no magic saddle, there's no magic bike. If you ride that many miles, that many days in a row, you're gonna be uncomfortable at certain points.
Yeah, and one of the things I've realized, I certainly don't ride the duration that you do, but it's just something you have to work up to, right? I know so many people, myself included, that 5 miles used to be painful.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And now that's nothing. And then you hit 15 and then 30, and it's just about sort of figuring out what works for you. So we've got the water, you've kind of gone over, you've got some of it mounted on the bike, some of it, in bags, that sort of thing. And then you've got the food mixed in there, and then the actual bike setup. What about, where do you put, your sleeping gear? What other equipment are you bringing with you, and how do you do so?
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of the rundown of how the setup worked. So fully rigid mountain bike, rigid seat, rigid fork, mountain bike, flat bar, and then there's a bar roll on the front. I like the Revelate stuff. They make great stuff. And then
I'm meeting with them in a couple weeks.
Yeah, they're super cool guys. Yeah. They make super cool stuff. The bag on the back, also Revelate. Their Terrapin bag, which is cool because it's like a pull-off dry bag, so it makes it easy to pull off when you want to camp. In the center of the bike, I had a frame bag, so full-size frame bag, able to fit stuff in there. And then at the beginning of the race, I had 2 accessory bags on the front of on the fork, which carried the water bottles and some extra stuff. After I ditched those bags, it was just a frame bag, or it was just a hand roll bag. It was the frame bag, it was the seat bag, and then I had 2 little water bottle holder bags on the handlebars, and I had 2 little gas tank bags that sit on the top tube, and that carried everything. My strategy was kind of have all your camping gear in one place. So if you end up getting rained on, or you end up having something adverse weather-wise happen, you can get the tent out first, set that up, bring that stuff into the tent, and then you can take that bag off of the back of the bike. Instead of having to open the bag, try to get it in without getting stuff wet, you can just take that whole bag off, go right into your tent with it.
That's one of the things that's made me able to both enjoy my bikepacking and backpacking trips, as well as go further and faster, is having a plan for when you're done hiking or done biking, how are you going to easily sort of check into the hotel for the night, right? And I'm glad you brought that up, because I know a lot of friends, including myself when I first started, that can be a stressful experience, especially if, like you say, you're arriving later than you thought. So going back to the equipment, that's very similar to what I have. But when I started, and certainly when my kids started, their bikes weren't even big enough to carry some of this gear. So, I always like to remind people that there's sort of the gear that you can get if you're doing this very often, but then there's the gear that you have in your garage that can get you out on that first bikepacking trip. And one of the funnest ones that I ever did is I actually couldn't find a bunch of the stuff, and my son and I just threw 2 backpacks on. It wasn't a super long trip, but we made it work. You had an interesting gadget on your front wheel, if I remember right. It was the hub was generating a little bit of electricity as it went?
Yes, that's a critical piece of the whole operation. I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot about that, crazy enough. But it's called a dynamo hub. And so a dynamo hub basically the hub itself has copper and magnets inside of it. And so as the hub rotates around, those magnets rotate around the copper, it generates an electrical charge, sends it into a cable that goes into a little box that transitions it from a direct current into an alternating current. And then that allows you to take that, plug another wire into it, and then you can charge. They're meant for lights that like specific to riding with a dynamo. But I was using them to fill battery caches. And so I would take those and I would fill my batteries, that I would have my external batteries so that I could charge my cell phone, I could charge my lights, I could do all that kind of stuff. And the thing about dynamos is they're amazing, but you have to be riding a lot of miles to really like get them to fill a battery cache up. But if you're doing 100 miles a day, they're amazing. I mean, you can really fill up a battery cache, and you have to be riding at a relatively quick speed. So there's some technical stuff as far as the advantages and disadvantages of it, but for a ride like the Tour Divide, they make life a lot easier because you can basically generate your own electricity. And that's another thing too, is really understanding how to like energy management. It's like, okay, having my cell phone on in this mode will kill the battery, and if I'm not conscious of like, do I have a battery charging, you basically just develop a system to figure out how to always keep a battery full, so that you're never left without a battery if things go sideways. And then you're always taking advantage of, if you have a place to sleep that has a plug, you're always plugging everything in. And that's a whole nother layer of strategy, because the last thing you want to do is end up without your navigation device, because that's a huge part of it. Is it's like you're doing this 3,000 mile journey, you don't know it obviously, so you need some way to navigate it. Generally speaking, it's going to be like a Garmin computer. In my case, I didn't have the money for that, so I was just using my cell phone and just using Ride GPS, which got me in trouble the first year because I downloaded the wrong GPS file, and I actually had paper maps, thank God, because that actually put me back on track so that I could do the route correctly. And it was a whole mess there. Another story for another time, but.
Well, that's interesting because, when I was a child and in Boy Scouts, and, I'm proud to say I'm an Eagle Scout, all we had is paper. And so whenever I go out with anybody, I always insist that we bring a backup of paper because, it saved me from a few binds as well. So talk about, you're getting closer to the northern boundary in the last 20%. You've kind of shared some stories in the past of the exhaustion that's going through your mind in combination with the joy. And now I'm kind of making an assumption here, but if you're going the opposite way of most other people, it seems like the closer you get to your finish line, the less people there are around you.
Correct. So it's fascinating going the opposite direction of the majority of the riders because, essentially you hit the racers first, and that's a trip because they're doing double the distance you are. So it's like, I'm 800 miles in, this person's 1,600 miles in. That'll really mess your head. So basically you have like the top 10, you have the fast guys, then you have the mid-pack, then you kind of have the stragglers, and then you have the relaxed touring types. And each one of them's got like interesting stuff. It's really a lot of fun. Yes, I'm doing my 100 miles a day, but you still have enough time to like chit chat and talk. And actually it was cool. I got to talk to the guy who broke the record. This guy was coming on down and I was like, beat that record, go, go, go. And he just pulled his bike over and I was like, we're having a conversation now. And I think part of it was just a psychological thing for him to just have somebody to talk to, because he's been out front ahead of everybody the entire time. And so now we're like the first people that he's probably seen for a while. But it was cool, like got to talk to him, and like super friendly, amazing dude. Justinas, he was an absolute animal, broke the record, and I think he did it in like 13 days and 20 something hours or something like that. Then you start kind of moving along and you start meeting, kind of the faster guys, and then you get in kind of the mid pack, and like the mentality of everybody changes. And then you kind of get to see like what matters to people, because it's like the people that are like the fast guys in kind of the beginning of the mid pack, like they still want to be racers, and so it's like, I'm racing. They're really, it's called dot watching. And I remember the name of the website now, it's called Track Leaders. That's where you can end up watching all of these racers, and they call it dot watching, where you get to watch everybody's GPS on the map. And you can watch your own too. So you get to see where people are at and what's going on, how you're ranking, if you're keeping up with the pace you need to keep up with, that sort of thing. So like guys that are kind of right on that threshold of being a blue dot or a white dot, you can see that it can get into their head a lot, where it's like, I gotta really stay on it and really go and be like on this thing. It's really important to them, which I found super interesting. You're like more worried about watching your digital dot on a screen than you are about having this incredible experience. And it's like, does it really matter? I mean, it's not like you're not winning. And even if you did, there's no prize money, there's no sponsorship, there's literally nothing waiting for you at the end of it other than the border gate in the desert. Nobody's there.
So, I mean, what matters to you by the time you're almost to the end? What's the most important thing you're thinking of crossing that finish line?
There's a lot of things that came through my mind. I had a lot of really profound experiences towards the end of it. I mean, the most important thing was just getting off the damn trail, to be entirely honest. By the time you're at the end of that 4 weeks, you're just ready to be done. So when I passed where I quit the first time, I had that kind of magic moment of like, I remember, because it was the hardest day again on the second year, because that was the hardest day the first year, was that day I quit. I was into this like crazy headwind. I was just making really slow mileage. I thought I was going to do so great. And, you have these delusions of grandeur in your mind of how the day is going to go. You're like, today's going to be a rocker day. I'm going to really kill it. And then you end up doing like 60 miles and you're like, I don't know what happened. And so you're just into this headwind and just dragging ass. Your energy's low. And I got to that spot, and that 10 miles leading up to the spot, and I remember it in my head, the signpost that I quit at. I just remember that 10 miles was so difficult in my mind to deal with. Got to that, and once I got past that and I was checking in, I'm like, how do I feel? Okay, body's in check, nothing's hurting more than it should. Everything seems to be good. My mental's pretty good. I got this. I'm gonna make this next like 1,000 miles I need to make. Like, I got this in the bag.
Did you stop there, or did you blow right past it?
I think I stopped. No, I don't think I stopped, because up the street from there is the place where this spot called Elkhorn Hot Springs, which is the best spot ever. It's amazing. It's this little gem on the course that actually is a natural hot spring, that they have a little cabin, a little hotel, cool little bar. I was like, well, I mean, I made it past there. I'm just gonna go to the spot I hung out at last year and spent a rest day there up at the hot springs. and it was amazing. Yeah, and I got past that, and then after that, it was like, okay, cool, now we're in new territory. And that was really unique because I had the whole time leading up to that, it was like, okay, I remember what's gonna happen, now I know this is coming up, and okay, this is where I was gonna camp, this is what I'm gonna do, because you have all this experience beforehand, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm on the frontier now. Like, I don't know where I'm gonna go.
How many miles did you have left when you had to quit the first year?
I think it was like 1,000 miles. Okay. Yeah, so I think I made it like 1,700 miles or something like that into it. Yeah, so it's close, but it's not. You know, 1,000 miles is a long way.
Because I know for me, some things that I've had bad experiences with on the bike or skiing or whatnot, I enjoy stopping and recognizing that now it's not a big deal. And others, I never want to see them again. I just blow right past them. So I was kind of curious which it was for you on that.
Yeah, like I rode by it and it just was more of that like, I'm going to do this. I really have what it takes to do this. It was just that rock solid feeling, which was amazing. And then getting past that, you know, it was awesome. I mean, getting up north was fantastic. All a bunch of places I had never seen. But really, I started getting really looped out like that last 3-4 days. Once I got into Canada, I really started getting loopy. Like I could tell my body, like you just feel like you're going crazy a little bit. Like your body has been pushed to this crazy extreme where I'm like, I'm kind of losing my mind a little bit. I'm starting to feel like my body's really doing some weird stuff. I had a day where I was riding along and I'd been doing cold plunges the entire time I was on the trail. So I'd get off my bike and I'd jump into a cold river as like a recovery thing and kind of snap me out of it and bring me a little energy to keep going. And I was going up into Canada. It was the second day in, and jumped into the first river, and I was like, okay, cool, got out and, you know, got on the bike, and it felt like I was drunk. I started kind of feeling dizzy and like kind of like feel like I'm inebriated right now. And then I started laughing so hard. I just started cracking up to the point where I literally almost crashed the bicycle because I was just in hysterical laughter. And I don't know why. I just think it was just, you're kind of stretched really thin at that point, and you just are kind of like at the threshold of your sanity, maybe. I don't know, it's tough to say.
Do you think it made it even more special to have those challenges in the first year and then come back the second year and overcome not only the ability to finish, but it sounds like the entire race was, I don't know if more enjoyable is the right word, it certainly wasn't easier, but you had encountered challenges. You had created a plan that works for you and your body and your desires of how to ride this, and you had exceeded those obstacles, right?
100%. And I actually I had it in a notebook that I was going through some old notebooks, and I looked at it, and it was in a notebook that I had brought with me on the tour. I had a little tiny notebook, and I remember at the end of that notebook there was a page I had written, and I said, thank God I didn't make it, because I wouldn't have anything to work on if I had.
Yeah.
And also, I was talking to my coach that I had hired that had helped me, and he's like, if you had made it the first year, it would have justified all the bad behavior that you did out there on the trail that it was okay. Whereas you failing this had forced you to really tune your game in, really focus in on what was important. Because the first year, I was all about just having an amazing story. My favorite stories are from the first year because I was just doing ridiculous stuff out on the trail. And then the second year, it was like, okay, we've really honed this in to figure out what do you need to do to actually accomplish this. And so that was incredible to see that transformation, because that was just more than just a riding transformation. It was a personal transformation. It helped me develop a lot of maturity, helped me develop a lot of respect for what I was doing, and really appreciate, like, no, this is some serious shit. Like, you could die out here if you don't have your shit together. You know, I had a couple of close calls out on the trail. I nearly got sideswiped by a 30-foot long diesel truck with carrying a toy hauler on the second day. And I literally was on a road, it's one of the few out in New Mexico. I was on this road, and it's like a little two-lane road that's a connector before you get into the Gila National Monument. And you're coming out of Silver City, you pop up over the mountain through the woods, come down into this little connector road. And I'm on the connector road pedaling along, and this guy in a big truck behind me is trying to go around me. So he pulls out real far, but it was over this hill. Couldn't see what was coming. Guy comes over the hill, and so the guy has to scoot over, and I'm literally riding on the white line because that's all there was on the side of the road, and there's like a definitely gonna hurt yourself falling this way, certain death going this way. And I mean, that dude passed within an inch of my handlebars. It could be over like that. There is a legitimate danger of being that vulnerable and out in the wild like that. You know, it's something that should be respected but not feared.
Let's assume somebody wants to do an adventure like this. It doesn't have to be, you know, from Mexico to Canada, but something that is out of their comfort zone, something that's a multi-day biking event, more mileage each day and in total than, you know, they've ever done. What kind of core advice would you have for them to start planning that and make it a fun and successful goal that they can achieve?
First and foremost, give yourself more time than you think you're going to need. You're never going to do as many miles as you think you're going to do.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. If you plan to do 100 miles a day, assume you're going to do 60. You don't know. You know, things come up. I mean, I had plenty of days where you did not make as much mileage as you'd like to. Do your best planning. Planning is always good. Any resources you can get as far as like GPS or, you know, any kind of GPS maps, any kind of topographic maps, any kind of weather stuff. That's all amazing information that you can do. Getting onto bikepacking.com is a great resource. I mean, they have a ton of different routes in all over the world, and you can get on there and they will give you easy, accessible routes. And honestly, even if you don't want to do something where you have to do that much planning, just find something in your backyard. You know, it's like, okay, well, I know that between here and the next town is 100 miles, and I know kind of the roads well enough that I should be able to make it. For people that are just trying to figure out if they like it, can they handle it, you know, just doing that initial overnighter. And then if you do want to do more multi-day stuff, assume you're going to ride not as far as you think you're going to ride. Underestimate what you're capable of, because most of the time we overestimate ourselves. And assume your plan's going to go wrong. The only reliable plan is that your plan's going to fail.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like things are going to come up. A real adventure isn't a perfectly planned trip. The reason my first year was so memorable and I had so many amazing stories from it was because everything went horribly wrong. I had all kinds of ridiculous mayhem. I was doing stupid things and I ended up getting into trouble for it and ended up biting me in the ass and I didn't finish. Yeah. But man, they were great stories. Whereas the second year, I really had it dialed in. My plan was super good and I had a couple of cool stories, but it was really just like, well, I rode 100 miles and I slept, and then I rode 100 miles and I slept, and then I rode 100 miles and I did that again and again for 27 days, which is what you want. You want to finish, but you know, it kind of depends on what you're trying to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the conversation. It's been fun to rehash it with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott. This is amazing.
Hey, mere mortals, it's your host, Scott Badeau again. I just want to share a few quick tips about how you can easily dip your toes into the super fun world of bikepacking. Stephen's story really shows that the journey of 1,000 miles truly does begin with a single step, or in our case, that first pedal stroke. My first bikepacking trip consisted only of my bike, a pretty basic backpack, my dog, and my 11-year-old son. We started out on a trail that was pretty close to our house, rode only a few miles into the forest, and enjoyed a very easy shakedown trip for our first try. I assure you that if we could do it, so can you. There are some great resources on websites like backpacking.com, and I've also got future episodes scheduled on this topic. There's just something unique about sleeping under the stars after an amazing bike ride, knowing that you have another awesome bike ride coming up the next day. I truly hope that this interview with Stephen inspired you to give it a try. Maybe not riding from Mexico to Canada, but at least from one cool spot to another.